Hello, everyone. This is AK Namul Haq again with the East West with my friend Philip Shah. And what a week! We had a big change coming in the world, probably. But as we go back, 40 years of friendship, Phil and I met before the Berlin Wall was, broken. Before, when Gorbachev was the Soviet leader, and Reagan, I believe, was the president of United States. And the world order that completely collapsed was from a bimodal Russia versus Soviet Union versus USA, became a unipolar world from where it started in 1991. From then onward, if you look at the history, things have changed. And I think we probably are some of the few generations who have witnessed the big changes that has been happening in the world. And so what we thought this particular episode, we will try to see from a history point of view, what we have seen before and what we have seen today. And I will ask Phil to start his remembering the days of the past.
Well, thank you very much, Anil. Well, Philip Shaw here from Dresden, Ontario again. We have a picture of each other, and I don't know if you remember that. We have a picture of each other. We're on the Pacific Ocean on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and we're
Yes,
both looking out on the sea. And
yes, I
I
remember.
often use that as an illustration, but both of us had no idea what life was gonna do for us or take us at that point. But when you think of those days, I can remember some of the geopolitical events that were going on, and specifically the fall of the Berlin Wall. I think you were in Dresden, Ontario at the time. And of course, that was before the internet. We were watching these things on television.
Exactly.
And also after that, we got fax modems. I remember you and I got fax modems. And I think after that, we were talking about that potential coup against Mr. Gorbachev, who at that time was the head of the Soviet Union. And there was a coup at one time against him. And then after that, Mr. Yeltsin came to power, but he was a large part of fending off that coup in the Soviet Union at the time. And you think about both of us analyzing those things in the day, talking about debating the issues, and then you translate us into 2025, where we're talking about an American president that seems to be siding with Russia in the war with Ukraine, as well as turning over the global order that we've known for the last 80 years, at least in this part of the world, at least this part of the world. And, it's got a particularly human bent to it now with regard to at least one part of the East-West team, because as a Canadian, we are hearing all kinds of intentions from the American president about making us a 51st state and annexation of Canada. And also, the president has launched a trade war against Canada with regard to tariffs. So I was just thinking, this is very personal now. And way back 40 years ago, when we thought about what was going to happen, it was hard to capitalize, hard to have any vision that we would get here to where we are today. And I just thought we've had all kinds of things in the interim, and those are things that happened at the beginning. We've also had the Iraq War. We've also had the Gulf War. We've also had the war between Iraq and Iran. I remember at the time there was I think, either an Iraqi student at Guelph at the time that had actually fought in the Iraq
Grand War.
Iran war that maybe you got to know. I didn't get to know him as much.
Yes,
So
yes.
it just shows you how history is fluid. It just shows you how fluid these things over the time of our 40-year friendship, and how the world continues to evolve. And it's not necessarily a better place today. A lot of these things that happened weren't very pleasant. And I suppose there were some good things. There are some good things as well. And there's certainly been an evolution in everything that's happening. And over a period of 40 years, we've seen it. And from both sides of the world, remember, that's our raison d'etre, that we see things a little bit differently because of where we're from. And I can tell you, over a period of 40 years, and looking at all these different world events, I'm a different person now, partly because of East West, partly because I have a friendship from somebody from the other side of the world, which if I didn't ever have, I certainly would have looked at the world differently. And of course, that continues today.
Thank you. No, I think when I look, as we were talking, I would look back. It was the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's when it's collapse of the Soviet Union, and it was only one leader in the world. I think everyone else was almost very quiet. I think that world would have been a different world if there was no other changes. So interestingly, when I see from a history point of view, the narrative more or less remain exactly same. You always need in a world of competition, you need a villain. And at that time, the Soviet Union was the villain. So every movie, if you remember the movies of the past, were looking at Soviet Union as the master criminal, and they were all showing that. That's how the world was. Now, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, this villain changed. If you go back, the villain became probably Iran and China, and that has continued for many years. Probably my reading is this is where I see the history a little bit differently, probably, is that until 19 probably 2000s, 2008, when Georgia, particularly so republic problem came, and that was the first time Russia woke up from their past quietness. In other words, until that time, the whole world in a way were following the newborn leader, which is the single leader, United States. And United States basically not only led the world, they dominated whatever they wanted to do. So if you look carefully, many of us in our parts of the world were not fully comfortable with it, I must say. And the reason we are not comfortable because in a unipolar world, it is very difficult for smaller countries to even take steps. Today, I was listening to the US Congress debate on the US AID. And, this is very interesting. And many people were hunching that Al Qaeda was paid by USAID or United States CIA. In this report today, I was watching it and I see a congressman, I think Republican, he was explaining even in 2024, after the fall of the Afghanistan, Haqqani, group of Afghan group, which are labeled as a blacklisted as a terrorist organization, received $500 million fund. So you realize that this was a USAID hearing happening in Congress. They were also talking about Osama bin Laden receiving almost $200 some million when he was alive. This was also, and these were all that we all knew in our part of the world. Probably the Western media never wanted to talk about it. But this was, I was watching this and I was surprised in a sense that Western media always thought this is a hoax. It's not true. And today it is in the Congress. Someone, I forgot the name of the Republican representative, he mentioned it and he said, this is what it is. And he was surprised that even in 2024, when the US has nothing to do with the Afghan anymore, because after the fall of Afghan, the fall of the Afghan government that US backed, they are still financing. So I see that was the scenario. Many of the Eastern part people like us were not fully comfortable because those who has, particularly United States, had all the power to do it. Probably this all got changes if I look back in the history. One event is Georgia. The second event is when in 2008 also the European Union and USA wanted Ukraine to be part of NATO. That's how it started. And then it was Libya. If you remember the Libyan, our friend,
Ahmad Jalala.
Yeah, Jalala was there, and fall of the Libyan government. And when you follow the Libyan government, probably it was the first times Americans were so powerful. They didn't even bother to look at United Nations, what he calls any resolution. They just walked in as a NATO power. So I think these were some of the events that basically made people uncomfortable in the sense that how did it happen? How can a superpower like that can behave like this? So if you think carefully, I see these are the changing, points or at least turning points where
Yeah.
things have changed. And here we are. We have a new US government, and completely, if you look at the whole scenario, we have now a new world coming, a new world order coming. We don't know what is going to happen, but it is
Well,
coming, I can tell you.
yeah, well, I guess the other argument you could make is we're just getting so old that we see a lot of history. That's all. But our friend Ahmad Jalal, I had supper with him before he passed away, and he told me about the NATO bombs in Libya. He was there when they were bombing, and
Mhm.
how incredibly loud it was and earth-shattering. And that's just another example of the things that I would have never ever imagined even hearing about if I hadn't gone to grad school 40 years ago and met somebody like yourself. And the other thing too, these flashpoints of geopolitics that you referred to, but we also have the changing world economy. Of course, it's really changing now again, but we had the rise of China and the rise of India and the rise of Asia economies. I can remember very clearly you telling me about stuff back in Bangladesh and different places, and then I can remember very clearly when you went back home in 1990 or 92, whenever it was, and you had a car and you had this and you had that, and you told me you could never imagine when you were growing up in Bangladesh having as much as you have now and seeing the country change as much as you've seen it change. And I fully realize it's changing some more. But you can multiply that across all of South and Southeast Asia. That's how the world has changed before our eyes. And even in the time we've done East West, we've seen a lot of change. So, it's been a personal odyssey for me as well. When you go back that far and learn this much from somebody from the other side of the world, and you probably don't know if you learned too much from me because I tended to have the Western view, especially 40 years ago. I tend not to have that now. Somebody asked, "Do we argue very much anymore?" And I think my wife asked that in 2024, and I said, "No, we mostly agree with each other now." And maybe that's because we've known each other for so long, and I kind of get the way the other side of the world is.
No, I think the world has changed, and I think I have never expected where US-Canada relationship is where it is today. Because to
Yeah.
me, that I think in our last few episodes I've mentioned is one of the biggest surprise that I have seen. Because Canada, being such a good friend of United States, even partners in crime. If you remember some of the other issues, remember the Iran issue where
Yeah.
Canada basically was the major player in getting the hostages out. If
Yeah.
you look into the Cuban problem, Canada was the one that was giving strategic changes. So Canada did a lot, and in such a way, I think nobody thought about it will happen this in this particular, and that's all happened. I personally think it's all because of the changing economic scenario, which you have rightly said. Because with the rise in Chinese economy, which is huge, because at one time, if American economy was falling, the world was crawling. There is no way they can go up. But right now, with the alternative economies are there, so everyone realizes that we have two legs. One leg is the United States, one leg on the Chinese economy. And as long as one of the economy is doing good, the world will go forward. So that's a big change. And that is something that I would say has been happening nicely, except that the Ukraine war, which is primarily, and this is where I always remember even this narrative today. The narrative today is this particular problem started in 2014 after the first orange revolution. But if I look carefully, it started in 2008 and probably 2004 when EU wanted Ukraine, which was a buffer state, but they didn't want to keep it as a buffer state. They wanted to make it as a part of NATO. I think those narratives is still missing. I see the Western media not probably telling the full truth, but is a half truth. They don't lie, but they give a half truth. And I think this is something you and I have been debating for many, many years.
Well, I think it's true, and I think there's a lot of ignorance as well. We haven't even mentioned Africa and South America very
Yes,
much
exactly, exactly.
either at this point. Like Brazil is an agricultural superpower, exporting more corn and soybeans than anybody else in the whole world. When you and I were on that beach back on Vancouver Island, you couldn't have even imagined that. You also have the American Secretary of State not visiting South Africa. He's going to for meetings there because of disagreements with regard to how they treat some of their white farmers. Really bizarre stuff. So, over a period of 40 some years, when we were on that beach in Vancouver Island, or we were back in the University of Guelph, we probably could have never imagined some of these things.
No.
And not only that, so if you add 40 years on to now, what are people going to be saying in 2065 and 2070? It's just hard to imagine. But we'll try to capture that. We'll try to capture the changes as much as we can as East West continues into the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Thank you for this nice talk. And I think this is a good history lesson. To me, is going back into the memory lane and looking carefully how the world has changed and how we have also evolved in our differences, our thinking process. And with East West, our objective was to inform people on both sides of the story, the way we think on different parts of the world. And with that, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.